Ian?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'll be back in the, yeah. So, but I'll be nearby. So if something happens,
Oh, okay.
you won't have line of sight to me, so don't freak out. I didn't run away. Yes. I will say we are trying to have. Pick the video file back there on two folks, and then like. So, okay, you know, it's not a lot of overlap.
So I guess this is really more just like that stuff anyway. I was wondering about if you can come out on Friday nights.
So, and I was surprised that when we offered, and sorry for what we were doing the all online version, I was a little surprised because that fewer people took us up on the you can come in and do it in person. I would have expected that to be a lot closer to the 50-50 split when we were all online.
These people are so tight. You know, Friday night so I was curious. I was like, what are they doing? Believe me, I've had small groups before.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome, both of you here in the church and on the live stream. We're really excited to have Cecilia Moore with us to explore the life of Sister Thea Bowman, a very multifaceted individual and musician as well. As you heard, either as you were waiting for us to begin on the live stream or here in the church, you heard some music. That was actually Sister Thea's music, and Cecilia will talk more about that. So again, we're thrilled to have her with us from the University of Dayton to come and share more about Sister Thea Bowman with us. So thank you so much.
Good evening. It's a privilege to be here to talk with you tonight about Sister Thea Bowman. Yes, as we were waiting for our program to begin tonight, we were listening to a recording of spirituals that Sister Thea made the year before she died. So I'll talk more about her and her singing probably next week when we deal with her spirituality. But tonight I'm here to introduce you to who Sister Thea was. So let's get started. I want to first start with this map for us to take a look at where Sister Thea was from. She was born in Mississippi, in particular Yazoo City, Mississippi. So 3 cities that I think are really important for us to know in relation to her life are Yazoo City, where she was born, and I'll tell you in a little bit why she was born in Yazoo City. Then she grew up in Canton, Mississippi, and towards the latter part of her life, she returned home to Mississippi and was hired by the Diocese of Jackson, Mississippi. So Jackson becomes also an important city in the life of Sister Thea Bowman. In 1989, on July 4th, Sister Thea Bowman received a wonderful gift. On that day, busloads of her students came to see her. They came to celebrate her life. They traveled from New Orleans, which was quite a distance from Canton, where she was from. They traveled to celebrate Sister Thea in the ways that she had taught them. They came to sing to her, they came to dance for her, and they came to preach. These were all things that she had taught them at the Institute for Black Catholic Studies. The students made this trip, and I'm told, I wasn't there, but I am told by people who were there, that when they found out that they were going to spend one of the Saturdays that they had to study, they were going to spend it most of the day driving up to Canton, and then they would have this gathering for Sister Thea, and then they'd drive back to New Orleans the same day. Some of the students were really worried about that because when they're at the Institute, it's a 3-week program, intense program of studies, and they were worried about whether they were going to be able to get their work done. So they were promised there'll be 2 buses. There'll be the party bus and there'll be the study bus. So that satisfied all the students, and so they made this trip to see Sister Thea. It was really important because she had hoped to be able to go to New Orleans that summer herself to teach, which she loved to do. But her health was really bad, and there was just no way that she could have done that. And so that's why the Institute decided to go to Sister. So as I said, they spent that afternoon singing and dancing and preaching and telling stories for Sister Thea. And at the end of that experience, Sister Thea sang to them. And by that time, her voice was not strong anymore. She had had so much chemotherapy and radiation. And she was very weak, but it was probably the last time that she sang to anyone in public. And the song that she sang was a spiritual. And I'm not a good singer, so I won't try to sing it to you, but if you want to go on YouTube later and look up Sister Thea Bowman singing "Done Made My Vow," I encourage you to do that. The most important line of this spiritual is, "Done made my vow to the Lord. I will go, I shall go, to see what the end will be." As I said, Sister Thea Bowman was born in Yazoo City. She was born in Yazoo City, Mississippi on December 29th, 1937. She was born into a deeply loving family, and it was a small family. It was a holy family, if you will, a lot like Jesus' family. She had her mother and she had her father. She called herself an old folks' child because she was the one and only child of Dr. Thea Bowman and Mrs. Mary Bowman. Her mother was considered a geriatric mother. Nowadays, I don't know that people would say that. I think, technically speaking, you would still be considered a geriatric pregnancy. Her mother was 35, and it was 1937. So there was a lot of concern about her delivering this child, and her husband, Dr. Bowman, was worried about it. And that's why he decided that in the last stage of her pregnancy that she should go to stay in Yazoo City, because Yazoo City had a hospital for Black people. There was no hospital that would take care of a Black person in Canton. And if she had to be born, he felt much safer that she should be born in a place that had a hospital in case they needed the services of the hospital. Her father was even older than that. He was 43. Now, this was a deeply segregated and also, frankly, really racist place, Mississippi was in the 1930s, as was most of the United States at that time. So here's Mrs. Bowman waiting to give birth to Thea in Yazoo City, and she went into labor early. And they called to tell Dr. Bowman that his wife looked like she was going into labor. And, you know, I hear these stories all the time about moms who give birth before the doctor can get there. Well, in this case, the doctor who was her doctor didn't get there in time for Thea's birth. But her father, Dr. Bowman, got there in time, so he actually delivered his own child. He delivered Sister Thea. And again, that story, I think, just really makes me think of Jesus and the narrative of Jesus. No room at the inn, no room in Canton for a Black woman to give birth. At the last minute, you have this kind of miraculous ability of Dr. Bowman to get there in time to bring Thea into the world. And they have the pilgrimage too. They make a pilgrimage back to Canton. And that's where Sister Thea would grow up. They took her to their home, 136 Hill Street in Canton, Mississippi. This house would be important to Sister Thea for the rest of her life. This is where they raised her, and this was also where, in their aging, she would return home to care for them. She came home to take care of her parents, and she took care of them until they died in 1984. So here we have in this house on Hill Street, it was a modest home. It wasn't a large house. It was a very modest house, but it was very comfortable. And we have living here Dr. Bowman, Mrs. Bowman, and Bertha. Her name was Bertha. Her name was Bertha Elizabeth, and I'm pretty sure that what I remember is that she was named after, I think, one of her father's sisters or one of her mother's sisters. She never liked the name Bertha, but that was her given name. Her parents were college educated. They were both college educated. Her mother was a teacher. Her father, of course, was a physician. They were very generous to her and to the community. The Bowmans were a well-loved couple in the city of Canton. They were kind and they were compassionate, and these were things that Thea also became. They loved indulging her and encouraging her. She was that spoiled child, you know, the one that has everything, all the toys, all the games, all the books, and a dog too. But she was taught to share what she had. So although she was quite indulged, she shared with her friends, and she had many friends that she loved to play with. She wore beautiful clothes. Her mother made all of her clothes, and she wore her hair, as we see here in this lovely picture of Sister Thea, neatly braided, always with a big showy bow. She was just really an adorable little girl. I think we can just all agree on that. Her mother was musical. She played the piano and the organ, and it is likely that it is from her mother that Thea inherited her own musical gifts. From time to time, from the time she was a child, she loved singing, and apparently she also had a very beautiful voice as a child, and her parents encouraged her to sing. So singing is something that she was doing from forever in her life. In particular, she loved to sing the spirituals, and that's what we had playing before the program started tonight, Sister Thea singing spirituals. Spirituals are, the spirituals are songs that come out of the African American experience of slavery. And she learned them when she was a little girl. She says she learned them especially from one of her neighbors, a lady that all the children called Mother Ricker. Mother Ricker gathered all the children around in the neighborhood, and she would feed them, and she would talk to them, and she would teach them the spirituals. She taught them not just the songs themselves, but she also taught them what they meant and how they should be understood, and also how to use them. And I'm telling you this now because this is going to be something that will become a very important part of the way that Sister Thea taught and preached herself. For them, and these spirituals centered Sister Thea. They centered her in her history as a Black person, in Black values, in the spiritual beliefs of the Black community, and also of the gifts of the Black community. In particular, the Black community that was Southern and also Christian. From the spirituals and from other elements of her culture, Thea learned what was especially important to the Black Southern Christian people, of whom she counted herself among. First of all, respect. Respect for all people. That was not something that the average Black person got, not even her father, who was a doctor. Outside of the Black community, Black people daily faced what today we call microaggressions. They probably suffered micro and macroaggressions on a daily basis. But even though you were not treated well, you were always supposed to treat everybody with respect. That was something she learned. She learned to be responsible. She learned to persevere. That will to always stick to something, to continue trying, even when you don't seem like you're making any progress. That was something that really meant a lot to Sister Thea, and we'll see as I get towards the end how important it was to her to always try. She also learned that we have to look out for each other. There's often a story that her students who had her when she taught at the Institute for Black Catholic Studies at Xavier University in Louisiana, they love telling this story about Sister Thea. Well, they have lots of stories that they tell about Sister Thea, but one of the stories that they tell that I think is appropriate here is about how Sister Thea used to tell a story about when one of their neighbors got a new car. And it wasn't just any new car, it was a Cadillac. And everybody on the street in the town, all the black people celebrated the fact that this person got a car. And they were proud. They were as proud and as happy as if the car belonged to them. But it didn't belong to them. But Sister Thea said, in a way, the car did belong to everybody. He had been blessed with a car. This neighbor of theirs, he had been blessed with a car, but because he had a car, that meant that everyone in the neighborhood was blessed with a ride. And Sister Thea used to say that, apparently. If you've got a car, I've got a ride. Now, little Thea proclaimed herself an old folks' child. That's what she said she was. She called herself an old folks' child. And because, well, she was born to old folks, and she spent a lot of her time with them and their friends, and she loved it. She loved being in the presence of elders. They were her people. She admired them, she respected them, and she cared for them. I'm going to move into the education of Sister Thea. I'm sorry I don't have a better picture for you. But this is the best I can do for the Holy Child Jesus Catholic School and Church. If I could have, time warped myself down to Canton, I could have gotten a nice picture today. But this is what we have. This school would become very central to Sister Thea's life and to the life of so many kids in her neighborhood in Canton. Now, I've already told you that both of the Bowmans were educated people. Her mother had a college degree. She was a teacher. Her father had several degrees. He was a medical doctor. So they had good educations, and they truly valued education. But getting a good education in Mississippi in the 1940s, when Thea started school, wasn't easy. This is a period of separate but equal. There was a separate school system for the white children and one for the black children, and nothing about these two systems were equal. From the buildings, to the resources, to how much the teachers were paid to teach them, there was nothing equal about it. And so black children, no matter if they were educated at home in Mississippi, no matter what type of education their parents may have had, they were challenged to get a good education if they grew up in Mississippi. You might remember Jonathan Kozel's work on the inequalities in American education. He spoke of savage inequalities, and there were savage inequalities in Mississippi's system, especially the schools for the black children. But that was all that was available. There was a public school for black children. That's what was available, and that's where they were living. And so that's the school that Sister Thea went to from grades 1 through 5. But in 1946, the Holy Child Jesus mission opened in Canton. This was a mission to black people. There was a white church, a white parish in Canton, but there was no church for blacks. And at this time, this is amazing, especially I think because we're going through this, what is it called, Beacons of Light, where we're trying to figure out how to get everybody together because we're not going to have very many priests to serve in a place like Dayton or Cincinnati. Think about this, you all. Between 1910 and 1984, there were 70 orders of women religious who served in Mississippi. Mississippi had a tiny Catholic population, really small. Over 1,000 priests also served in Mississippi at that time. And a lot of them came to Mississippi to serve the black community, to evangelize the African American community. They knew that black people there didn't have access to a lot of things that they really needed and frankly deserved, like good schools and hospitals. So you'd see Catholics establishing schools, little Catholic schools for black children, hospitals, social services, that sort of thing in Mississippi during this time. And so we see it happen in Canton too, with the Holy Child Jesus mission. Now, the buildings for the mission: 2 former Army barracks, wood frame Army barracks that had been, I guess, disassembled, trucked over to Canton, reassembled. One of the barracks was for the school, and they used the other barrack for a set of barracks for a chapel. This is where Sister Thea is going to go to school. Now, the teachers who taught at the Holy Child Jesus were Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration. That's important for us to know, because Sister Thea will become a Franciscan Sister of Perpetual Adoration. They had been doing good things for the poor in Canton for years, even before they came down and established this mission. The sisters had been sending clothes and books and food and other sorts of resources to the community for quite some time. But coming down there to teach in 1948 was their first time being a physical presence in Canton. In the first year of the school, 1948, 1949, they had 95 students in the school. Sister Thea was one of them. Most of the kids weren't Catholic. They weren't Catholic. Some were even children of ministers, black ministers. But here's the thing. The parents were like, this looks like it's a good educational opportunity for our children, and we want them to have the best that we can give them. So this is why they were drawn to this school. And so we would have a school established a Catholic school established for black children before we'll have a church built in Canton. There won't be a church that is built for Holy Child Jesus until 1966. At age 10, she decided, she's at the school, and she's deciding she really likes Catholicism a lot. And she's also doing really well at school. When she started at Holy Child, she was a grade behind. But she caught up really quickly. And because she had caught up, her teachers said, okay, Thea, or Bertha, because she's not Thea yet, she's still Bertha. Okay, Bertha, go over there and help Jane and Paul with their reading. And so Sister Thea becomes a teacher when she's a little kid. She starts teaching. And you know what, I gotta say, I went to Catholic school, not in the period of Sister Thea, but I remember I had Sisters of Mercy who taught us. I remember them doing that with us too. kids who were very good at math or very good at spelling or very good at reading, they would use the kids as a teaching assistant. They would help teach. And that is, we would say, I don't know that the sisters were conscious of that, but those of us who look at Black culture and principles of Black culture, that's a very deep principle of Black culture, that each one teach one. Each one teach one, that we teach each other. We should be teaching each other. So she's doing that. She loves her sisters, the sisters at the school. She loves what she's learning about Catholicism. And she tells her mom and dad she wants to become a Catholic. And they let her. So she converted to Catholicism when she was 10 years old. Now, her mother and father did not convert at that time. Her mom was an Episcopalian, her father was a Methodist. They were active in their churches. But they allowed her to make that choice. They supported her in that choice. And later in their lives, both of them would convert to Catholicism too. Now, one of the things that she noted about her school was that she felt like the kids who went to Holy Child Jesus School could feel the love and dedication of the sisters. They saw the sisters live out what they taught at the school, that we were supposed to care for each other, body and soul. We're supposed to do the corporal and the spiritual works of mercy. And she said, we could see that in them. We could see that in them. So these sisters became very respected and trusted members of the community that they served. Sister Thea not only would convert to Catholicism, but she would also discern, while she's at Holy Child Jesus School, that she had a vocation, a religious vocation. She felt in particular that she was supposed to become a Franciscan Sister of Perpetual Adoration. She felt God had called her to that. Now, she had a time, convincing her parents of that, because if she was going to become a Franciscan Sister of Perpetual Adoration, that meant she'd have to leave home, because their mother house and their school and their college was not in Mississippi, it was in Wisconsin. And so she had a hard time convincing them. And remember, she's their only daughter. They adore her. I totally can understand why her mom and dad were not. It took a lot to sell them on this idea, but she got her way. And at 15, she left home. She left 136 Hill Street and boarded a northbound train for the purpose of becoming a Franciscan Sister of Perpetual Adoration. The destination of this train was St. Rose of Viterbo Convent in La Crosse, Wisconsin. And when she got on that train, everything in her life changed. The weather, the food, the accents, the sights, the faces, the expectations. She went from being in a thoroughly Black community to being in a thoroughly white community. That was big for her. She was now experiencing what it meant to be the minority, because she had never been the minority. She had always been part of the majority in Canton. It's mostly Black. Not everybody was kind at St. Rose Convent to her. But there were sisters who were like the ones that she had known in Canton at Holy Child Jesus. And those ones were the ones who helped to keep her going. Adapting to cultural differences was really hard for Sister Thea. especially the food, and I can get that because I love food. She's like, there was no fried fish, there was no fried chicken, there was no collard greens, there's no sweet potatoes, there's no delicious cakes, there's no well-seasoned food. What there was plenty of, quote, heartier German-style food. Lots of meat and potatoes. And she had a very hard time getting used to that. But she did. As we like to say, nevertheless, she persisted because she is about perseverance. Another thing that really helped Sister Thea was her parents. Her mom and dad wrote to her all the time, and she wrote to them. And those letters were a lifeline for her. She had to learn not to talk at mealtime, because in the convent, I think you got to talk at lunchtime, but you did not talk in the morning, and you did not talk during supper. You did not speak. And that was hard for her, because Sister Thea had a lot to say. She liked to talk. It was also dinner time was the time when you caught up with each other and when you laughed and you just enjoyed each other's presence, and that was not the way it was in the convent. She had to learn to pile on layers to stay warm. The one thing that she got to do from home that was the same was she got to sing. She got to sing in the choir at St. Rose. She became part of the convent choir, and she did love that. She had a terrible health setback while she was there. She contracted tuberculosis. She spent 3 months in the hospital there in La Crosse, and then she was sent to a sanitarium in Stevens Point, Wisconsin, and she was there for 9.5 months. Can you imagine that? She's lucky, though, because her mom was able to come up and see her during that time. Many times her mother came. Her father also came up to see her during that time while she convalesced. She eventually recovered from that. In 1956, she received her religious name, and that is Mary Thea, Thea meaning of God. And she was delighted to have a new name. And she loved even more that this was related to her father's name, because remember her father is Theon, and now she is Thea. She made simple vows in 1958, and she took her final vows in 1963. And on that great day, her parents were there. Sister Thea, like a lot of sisters, and I don't know that people are really aware of this, a lot of Catholic school teachers of that period began to teach school before they had a degree. So you could start teaching, straight out of high school, start teaching school. Sister Thea started teaching before she finished college. Even though her religious community had a college, she didn't go to the college like a student would enter a college, study for the 4 years, get the degree. She had to go to the college during the summer. That's how the sisters went to college. So it took them a long time to get their bachelor's degrees. But she had already started teaching. You would already get put into the process of teaching, so you would be teaching. Her first assignment as a teacher, she was missioned, that's what they called it. She was missioned to this affluent parish in La Crosse, and that school was called Blessed Sacrament School. And La Crosse at that time was what was called a sundown town. Sundown town means if you're black, you need to be out of the town before sundown. It's not safe for you to be here after sundown. There were 21 black people in La Crosse, and I'm sure at sundown they were locked in their houses. So this is where they sent her to teach. It's 1959. We're not even in the heat of the civil rights movement yet. When some of these white parents heard that Sister Thea was going to teach, they started complaining. They're like, no, this is not going to happen. Not going to have a black teacher for my child. But her community said, she's coming to teach at that school. And that's the way it is. Now, Sister Thea, you can look at her, you can tell, kids love her. People love Sister Thea. Sister Thea was beautiful. She was tall, she was willowy, she was very pretty, and she had that sweet Southern voice. Believe me, within hours, she had these little children, 5th and 6th graders, adoring her. And so these kids are like, she's okay, we like Sister Thea, Sister Thea's fun, Sister Thea's great. And so, the parents started to come around too. And so they were sad when 2 years later, Sister Thea's leaving and going to get to go home. And Sister Thea's like, yay, I'm going back home to Canton. She went back home to Canton to teach at her school, Holy Child Jesus School. So these are pictures of Sister with kids from her school, the school that she went to and that she returned to as a sister. Now, she taught there from 1961 to 1968, and she taught both the elementary school kids and the high school kids. She was a great teacher. She was creative. She was very fun. She used music. She used poetry. She used dance. She used drama. She created all sorts of wonderful, fun learning opportunities. She created a student choir and took them on the road. This is what she had to say about teaching. She said, quote, "Our children are longing to be loved. They have to know they are somebody. We have to create within our schools an environment in which every child is special." End quote. She filled the classroom with depictions of black people in history, black people in the Bible. Sister Thea is one of the early people. Yeah, there's black people in the Bible. Black people in church history, black saints. Sister Thea outfitted her classroom this way. And it was very intentional. She said, she believed that this was important for these children to develop a sense of confidence and pride in themselves in a culture that told them they had nothing to be proud of. She's like, they have a lot to be proud of, and they're going to have it reflected everywhere in here. She also wanted these children to understand that the church was theirs too. It did not belong to one set of people. The church belonged to everyone. She said children needed to know they were special because they are God's children. She would employ that each one teach one method when she taught, the same way that the Franciscan sisters had used it when she was a student at Holy Child Jesus. She was happy to be at home. She was among her people. She got to see her mom and dad. She got to see all her elder friends. She got to eat her food. She got to do all of that back home. But it was also hard being back home. And the reason why it was hard, because now Sister is a sister, and she lives in the convent. And again, we're 1961, 1968. Yeah, civil rights movement is going, but Mississippi's one of the most intransigent places. This is where people get killed. People like Michael Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman, assassinated in 1964, and many others. there were people in Canton, white people in Canton, who were deeply offended that Sister Thea was living in the convent with white sisters. She was not allowed to ride in the car with her sisters. When she needed a ride, her mom and dad had to pick her up and take her where she needed to go, because they were threatened if they saw her with the white sisters. All the while, she's going back to Wisconsin in the summer to Viterbo College, which is her community's college, and she earns her BA. In 1965, she earned her BA and earned it with Latin honors, magna cum laude. 1966, she begins part-time studies at the Catholic University of America. The plan was that Sister would earn a doctorate in English and she would come back to Viterbo as a professor at the college. Being in DC was something that Sister Thea loved. She loved it because it was so diverse. There were people from all over the world in Washington, D.C., from all over the United States in Washington, D.C., and she loved learning about people and their culture. Sister Thea loved being a Black woman and everything that came with it, but she also loved learning about other people's cultures, and she deeply believed we all need to celebrate who we are. And I'll talk more about that next week, too, because I think that's part of her spirituality. So she's loving it. She's making friends who are from all different kinds of cultural backgrounds. And it also was the first time she ever got to interact with Black professionals. Because remember, she left Canton when she was a little girl, and she's only been, and then she was up there in Wisconsin, totally white world. All of her fellow teachers at Holy Child Jesus are white. They're white sisters. So she had never really gotten to interact and make friends with Black professionals. And that was very important for her, because it inspired her to see Black people with education who were able to just keep going and moving and doing and accomplishing things. Because in the South, Black people with education, even though they had education, they were kept down. They weren't allowed to develop to their fullest potential. So this was very exciting for her, as was Vatican II. She really especially liked about Vatican II the encouragement for enculturation. And when she was in Washington, she attended Black parishes there, where she saw Black Catholics beginning to adopt Afrocentric styles of worship, and she liked it. She liked the drum, she liked the dance, she liked the vestments, all of it. And she also felt that this made it possible for Black Catholics to fully participate and express themselves as Catholics. If they could go to their culture and bring the treasures of their culture into the Catholic Church, she just felt that that was all to the good. This is also about the time when Sister Thea began to wear African dresses and headscarves that she would later be known for. What did she study? What did she focus on at Catholic University in terms of her master's and doctorate? Interesting. St. Thomas More and his rhetoric. That's what she wrote her dissertation on. At this time, she joined the National Black Catholic Sisters Conference. This was an organization that made it possible for Black women who were members of religious communities all across the country to gather yearly. That was really important for a lot of Black sisters, but especially Black sisters like Sister Thea, who were the only Black person in their community. Having this nationwide community of Black sisters to share and to build and to grow with, That was very important for her. She was able to teach a course on Black literature at the Catholic University of America. And in 1971, she went back home to, now to her northern home, back up there to Wisconsin. She returned to teach at Viterbo College. And in 1972, that's when she earned her doctorate from CUA. Her parents gave her a gift of a trip to Europe. Some of her sisters, religious sisters, were going to go to Europe that summer, and her mom and dad gave her tickets so that she could go too. And she loved that because it increased her understanding of European cultures. And she saw a lot that was beautiful there when she went to Europe. She leaned into, once she got to Viterbo, she leaned into create what today we call diverse and inclusive learning environments and curricula. She believed that whenever it was possible, it was best to learn about a culture from a person who belonged to that culture. And one of the things that she did at Viterbo was she would invite members of the Ho-Chunk Nation in Wisconsin to come to Viterbo and to teach Native American literature. She wanted her students to learn from Native American scholars themselves. She was a well-loved and respected professor at Viterbo, but that part of her life ended in 1978 when she came back home to Canton to take care of her parents. They were getting old and they needed care, and she was their only child. So she comes back to Mississippi, she comes to Canton, and when she gets there, the Bishop of Jackson, Mississippi, invited her to take a job with the Diocese of Jackson. What he wanted her to do was to promote intercultural awareness in the diocese. There is a lot of diversity in Mississippi. It's not just a white-black place. It never has been. There are important groups of Native Americans there in Mississippi. There were a lot of Asians who made Mississippi their home too. So there was cultural diversity in the diocese. And he said, you know, I want for our people to know each other, and I believe that you can help with this. And she was like, absolutely, this is definitely something I want to do. So what we would see her spend the next many years doing is creating programming for diverse audiences of all ages. And the purpose of it was to help people to see how can we break down cultural barriers and what do we gain when we do that. She wanted people to know that we all have something of great value to give each other from who we are. She believed that it was important to make these events fun, because Sister Thea was a fun person. She liked fun. And she believed we learn better if we're having fun. If you're having fun, you're going to learn. You're going to remember. You'll stick with you. That's why it worked with the kids. So the people who attended Sister Thea's workshops got to see her fully alive and vibrant, singing, dancing, acting, preaching, all of it. She believed that what we see means more than what we hear. And that's why she felt it was especially important for children to see themselves. So whenever she had an opportunity to do an event that would have Black children at it, she wanted to do that event because she said, when Black kids see me, they understand they can be Black and Catholic. And they also understand that at God's table there are many places. There's a place for everybody at God's table. She also taught about, in these workshops and things that she did, she focused on baptism. And she said, baptism is really important because it makes us all responsible. No matter how old we are, she said, we are responsible to, quote, preach, to teach, to worship, to pray, to serve, to help somebody, to feed somebody, to love somebody. You're never too young. And that's what your baptismal promises call you to do all of those things. In her role, she organized a children's choir, so you can see the kids behind Sister Thea. They would go out with her, they'd perform at churches and schools and community events. And that was great because it's wonderful music, but there was also a purpose for that for her. She said, this helps children to become poised, to be confident, and to develop a sense of pride in themselves and in their history. She traveled around leading retreats, revivals, days of reflection, etc. I can't tell you how many people. I never met Sister Thea myself. I never met her. I will confess, I did not know who Sister Thea was until 1992. She had died by then. I didn't know who she was until I went to study at the Institute for Black Catholic Studies. And people talked about Sister Thea, and that's when I learned who she was. But I've been out here in Ohio teaching at UD for 25 years now, and I can't tell you how many people walk up to me and tell me about when they met Sister Thea, remembering her coming to Dayton, Ohio, doing retreats, doing workshops, and people remember what they learned from her. They'll tell me in great detail what Sister taught them that day. Whenever she could bring two or more cultures together to share their histories and their cultures, she did that. She was all about that. She began a tradition, and her tradition, I'm sure she had lots of traditions, but this is something that she would have people do. She'd ask everybody to stand up, and she'd ask you to hold hands, and often she'd ask you to cross over, do the crossover handhold. And together, everybody would sing, "We Shall Overcome." She's most well known for having the U.S. Catholic bishops do that very thing in 1989. That's something you can also check out on YouTube. In addition to that, she became a very important teacher at the Institute for Black Catholic Studies, where she helped prepare clergy, religious, and laity who served in Black communities to learn how to bring the best ministry possible to Black people. She said, if you're going to serve in the Black community, bring your best. We do not need you here if you're not going to bring your best. She also taught preaching at the Institute for Black Catholic Studies. That was a course that she taught. And apparently she was an excellent teacher of homiletics. Now, as much as she did, and as many people as loved Sister Thea and appreciated her and what she was doing to raise awareness, she also experienced real resistance. Some white people resented her because they weren't yet ready to accept the human dignity of other folks. And I'm just putting that as plain as I can put it. There were some white people who encountered Sister Thea who were not ready to accept that Black people were fully human and that other folks were too. So she got resistance there. She also got some resistance from some Black Catholics because some of them felt she was bringing too much Protestant influence into the Catholic Church. her singing, the way she preached, those sorts of things. They're like, that's not Catholic. So there were some people who were not fans of Sister Thea. 1984 was a very hard year for Sister Thea. Very hard year for her, because that's the year that both of her parents died. Her mother first, and then her father. And also in that same year, that's when she learned she had breast cancer. When facing the news of the diagnosis and the prognosis for her with cancer, Sister Thea is said, quote, "What matters is how I love, how I laugh and listen, and how I communicate the good news." That was her response to their prognosis. Over the next 5 years, Sister Thea determined, quote, "I will live until I die." That was her philosophy. That was her maxim. I will live until I die. And she packed those years with so much: travel, teaching, preaching, writing, singing, serving, loving, all of that. She was blessed with so many friends, and I like imagine what it was like. I know so many people who were her friends and who loved her. I can imagine Sister Thea had a hard time, because I'm sure they were all competing with each other, like, I want to do it for Thea, I want to do it for Thea. But these friends helped her to keep living till she died. That included a trip to the motherland. In 1985, she got to go to Africa. That's something she really wanted to do. She went to Kenya and Zimbabwe and Nigeria. So she went to the east, she went to the south, and she went to the west. In 1988, when she found that she was no longer in remission, she went to Africa one more time. She went to Tanzania, and she needed even more help to make that trip, but that was important to her, and so she went. In 1987, she was on the news. There was a special that Mike Wallace did. Mike Wallace did a special 60 Minutes special on Sister Thea Bowman. I also know that Harry Belafonte, he wanted to make a movie about Sister Thea. Now that never got done, but Mike Wallace's interview with Sister Thea was viewed by so many people. They kept replaying it because people wanted to see it. She continued to travel around the United States to other dioceses, to give these talks, to give workshops, to do revivals. She contributed to the revival of the National Black Catholic Congress movement. It hadn't been held since the late 1890s, and it got revived in 1987, largely through Sister Thea pushing for it. She also contributed to the groundbreaking Black Catholic hymnal. I don't know if you all use Lead Me, Guide Me here, but it's a beautiful hymnal. And Sister Thea was one of the editors of Lead Me, Guide Me. In '88, she recorded 2 albums, Sister Thea, Songs of My People, and her Christmas album, Sister Thea, Round the Glory Manger. In 1989, she addressed the U.S. Catholic bishops at Seton Hall University. And she began her address with this statement: "What does it mean to be Black in the church and society?" And she answered it by singing a spiritual, and the spiritual she sang was, "Sometimes I feel like a motherless child." And then she would go on to talk to them, lay it out for them, all of what that meant. By the summer of 1989, her health was so much in decline. There were things she wanted to do that summer, like go to the Institute, but she couldn't do that. She continued to communicate with her friends and to let them know what was going on with her. One of her last speaking engagements was in that summer. She gave a presentation at the Faulkner and Yaknapatawa Conference, which is held every year in Oxford, Mississippi at Ole Miss. And she was somebody who regularly went to that conference. And well, this year she presented a paper called Faulkner and the Old Time Religion, and she dazzled them. Singing helped Sister Thea so much. She would say, "If I can sing, I can cope." She died at home, 136 Hill Street, Canton, Mississippi, on March 30th, 1990, there with friends. Over 1,500 people gathered at St. Mary's Church in West Jackson, Mississippi for her homegoing. I'm sure that there were at least 1,500 more people who wanted to be there. Her dear friend, Father Bede Abram, celebrated her funeral mass, and another one of her dear friends, Father John Ford, offered her homily. And he told those gathered, "We must always find ways to imitate this irreplaceable woman." The congregation sang her favorite songs. She picked them. She told them what to sing at her funeral. So they sang "This Little Light of Mine" and "I'll Be Singing Up There." On her tomb, she's buried in Memphis, Tennessee, with her father and her mother and an uncle. On her tomb is written, "Sister Thea, 1937 to 1990. She tried." And that was her total aspiration in life, to be one who tried. So that's where I will leave it with you this evening. I want to see if anybody wants to ask any questions. If you have a question or if you want to make a comment, there's a microphone there. They've asked me to ask you to go to the microphone if you have a question or a comment. I'm happy to answer questions. But if not, I understand that too. I don't want you to leave, though, before I can give you something. I have something to give you. So, I don't know. Do you have questions? No? Oh, okay, there's a question. Maybe two questions.
This question isn't about Sister Thea, although your talk was very interesting, and I can't wait to look up some of the YouTube videos that you referenced. But I never really thought about this, but you made some comments about how Catholics had come down to Mississippi, to help the blacks at that time. I guess I'm curious what role the Catholic Church played in the civil rights movement, and, is that something that we as Catholics should be proud of, or should the Catholic Church have done more?
Okay, thank you for your question. That's a really good question. And I will have to say, this is something I learned when I started teaching at UD. I'm a historian, I'm not a theologian, but the theologians always are using the language of it's both and. And I think that's pretty good, because the question about what role did Catholics play in the civil rights movement, I think Catholics played some very positive roles. Most of the roles that we would see Catholics play would be very quiet roles. You really won't see any big Catholic, like public Catholic involvement in civil rights until we get to Selma in 1965. And Catholic sisters are really foregrounded in the Selma campaign. But Catholics are working in quiet ways. I like to think of the civil rights movement as being a long movement, and I just taught about this a few days ago, well, to my undergraduates, and I tell them, really, civil rights movement essentially begins when the Civil War ends, because there's this really short window of time when black people have some rights in America. We call it Reconstruction, and it only lasts for about 10 years. It ends around 1877, and from that point going forward, there's a systematic denial of rights to black people. And black people from that time are trying to get their rights, trying to get their civil rights. And so I think one can count the work that groups like Sister Thea's community did in coming to start these schools, which were so important for helping kids to get a quality education that would mean that they could go on and do more in their life. That's a civil rights type thing, I think. So you could look at things like that, but you could also look at direct involvement. And one of the things I didn't talk about, because I didn't really have time in this talk, the pastor of Holy Child Jesus, he got involved in doing work for voter rights. So, and there are lots of instances where the priest or the sisters were not directly involved. They allowed civil rights, people who are formally understood to be leaders in the civil rights movement, they allowed them to use parishes to gather, to plan, to work. The hospital, if you know the story of Selma, the hospital in Selma for black people was run by a Catholic order. There was no other hospital in that city for black people. So all the people who were beat up, on the Pettus Bridge, they were taken to the Catholic hospital to be taken care of. But the bishop Bishop Tulin, he had forbidden any priest or sister who worked in his diocese to directly get involved in civil rights. So a lot of those orders had to decide, do we get directly involved in civil rights and run the risk of getting kicked out and not being able to continue to do the work at the hospital, continue to teach these children, continue to pastor these mission churches that are there for black people, or do we figure out how we can support the movement in quiet ways? So you see that. But another part of it is, and again, I don't have enough time to talk about all of it here. We also see really important things that black Catholics were doing in terms of the civil rights movement. And those folks and their activism isn't well known either. So there are things that you could be proud of, you can be proud of in the history, but there are other things that I don't know that we can be proud of. It's some good, some bad. Okay. I hope that answers it. Yes, sir.
Thank you for your talk. That was very beautiful.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
With regard to Sister Thea, the preacher, there's usually a sharp line which you're partially pointing out to between what a priest can do and what a lay people such as Sister Thea could do. So where was that distinction? How far did she go in terms of her preaching, and what did she preach?
Well, remember, I never actually got to see Sister. I didn't know Sister Thea was until she had been dead. So I never saw her in person myself. But she believed that, she did believe that we were all called. That's part of your baptism. Now, no, I mean, she didn't preach in masses. I don't think she did. I've never seen where she was doing that. But Sister Thea did do retreats, and can't you preach at a retreat? Sister Thea did revivals. Revivals are not Eucharistic liturgies. And so she did preach at revivals. So, yeah, Sister Thea was not somebody who was, I don't think she was a rule breaker. If that's what you're kind of asking, like, was she like trying to be like a priest? No, because she was very clear on what their role was and what hers was. But I think that I think I'm right that Sister did think that we all are called to preach, to share the good news with each other, and no matter what our, whether we're part of the clergy or we're part of the laity, we all are supposed to be using our lives, our voices. Sometimes we preach with what we say, and sometimes we preach with how we live, right? So I think if we think about it in that way, yes. Okay. Thank you all so much. And I have something to give to people who came, so I'll do that while you close up. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you so much for being here. We invite you to all join us next week to explore the spiritual life of Sister Thea, now that we understand her more in her historical context. You'll also have an email that'll have some more background and reading about Sister Thea, so there's an additional resource that should hit your inbox any minute now. So we hope to see you all next week. Thank you so much all for being here. Thanks again to Cecilia for presenting.